This will be a fairly detailed walkthrough of how to create this, a KMZ file. When opened in Google Earth, there's a few features that make this a very useful KMZ. One is it includes these image overlays, which add to the presentation both with just eye candy, such as this water at the bottom of the screen that is just kind of there, as well as legend and instruction. So this legend explains what is being seen, as well as provides some additional instructions, such as click on each shape for additional information. This little bubble pops up and gives us just that, additional information based off of each county being represented. It also says select additional options in your Google Earth sidebar. So over here, we've got radio buttons. If I turn one on, the others automatically turn off, and the legend changes depending on what is being shown. So what I'll be doing is showing you three primary steps to complete this. The first is using ArcMAP to find data and essentially pare it down and tweak the attributes to make it to a format that is more easily imported and styled with Google Earth. The second step will be just that, styling in Google Earth using two methods, style sheets and properties based off of the layers. And the final step is creating and importing these image overlays, and finally packaging this up in a way that can be opened on any computer. So if you want to jump to the 37 or 38 minute mark, that will be the start of the second step. Everything up until that is essentially the same information I shared in Wednesday's class from November 30th. If you jump to about the 75 minute mark, that is about where I'll be starting the KMZ stuff, the image overlay. So I encourage you to jump around. Let me know if you have any questions. And with that, we will jump straight into the first step, which is working with ArcMAP and the data. And of course, this is just one of many, many different ways that you can visually display information. So good luck. I look forward to seeing what you create. I have a blank ArcMAP document open with nothing added quite yet, but in a moment I will add data that I got from the nationalatlas.gov website. So if you come here and then click on Mapping Professionals, Raw Data, you'll find a lot of really good information to potentially use for this assignment. So I encourage you to look through the overviews of each one of these and try to find something that includes a shapefile for reference, which is probably going to be county boundaries, as well as some database files. One might be the census data, one might be water use, and that will be the example that I will be showing. So we'll go ahead and close that. On my desktop, I've already got a folder, and inside of this there's three pieces of data that I have downloaded and extracted. The county P020, that is the county boundary information. These other two are just database files, essentially just a collection of attributes. The CE is the census, and the water use is the water use. Now, I'll come back in a moment to look through this .txt file. It's not necessarily included with everything you find online, but the stuff at the National Atlas is really good about including this text file that contains a lot of good descriptions of the metadata, and it explains how the information was collected and where it came from. So, we'll come back to that in a moment. But I've got my data downloaded. I've got my file ready to go. Two things you'll probably want to do right away is save this file. So I'll save it in that same folder and just give it something simple like A5. Now the other thing that's a good idea is to set a geodatabase. Now there's always one that's default that just kind of works magically in the background. For this, you'll want to set one just to keep the file structure and everything nice and clean. Under geoprocessing, click on environments, and on the dialog that should open up, click on Workspace, and we'll set the current and the scratch. Really easy to do. Click on that little folder. Probably want to navigate to that same folder we were just in, and you want to click the new file Geodatabase icon right here. Now really this is just a folder with a .gdb extension, and there's probably some other stuff happening, but I'll give that the same name of a5.gdb. Now I'll hit tab just to get that to register, and I'll click on it again because I want to make sure that it's showing up down here. So once that is set, hit add, and I can see that it has in fact been added. So what I'll do here is copy that and just paste it under my Scratch workspace as well, and I'll hit tab just to make sure that registers and hit OK. So at this point you should be ready to go. You can either follow along with the same data I've used, or if you want to be working on your assignment, you might just jump straight to the data that you'll be using. So we'll add data, and I'll start by adding the county boundary information. Covered this in class. It's lacking some information to be projected. It still has enough information to be geo-referenced, just not projected. There's a couple different things. For example, we can display it in Google Earth because it honors the geo-referencing, and there's really only one way to display things in Google Earth. ArcMAP wants to know the projection. For this assignment, if you get all of your data from one source, for example, the National Atlas, you can just skip over this. You don't need to define it. But if you wanted to overlay this against sources from other sites, or if you wanted to overlay it with base map information built into ArcMAP, you would need to define the projection. So to do that, click on your search key, search for define projection, find the correct toolbox, and this is the path you will want to use. Select predefined, geographic coordinate system, North America, and NAD 1983 HARN. Once that is defined, you can overlay this to your heart's content. But again, you don't need to do it for this assignment. For the remainder of this exercise, I am not going to be doing that because we don't need to. But we do need to add the other pieces of information. So let's see, there is my census database file and my water use database file. Worth pointing out, we haven't joined it yet. We've just added it to this a5.mxd file. It's just linked. That's all this file knows about it. It's not being displayed, and in fact, if you click on the drawing order button, you only see the one thing that can be displayed, which is our county boundaries. If I click on my list by source, I can see that I've just linked to the database file. So again, we could actually do this later on. I like to just get everything set up before we start. Let's take a look at the attribute table for the county. So it includes a lot of weird numbers, the FID, the shape, area and perimeter, the FIPS, etc. Let me talk about this briefly. Some of these we don't need to worry about. FID, shape, the area and the perimeter actually relate to the geometric shape, not necessarily the geographic property. So the area does not really have anything to do with the square miles of that county. So just keep that in mind. They're just attributes that just get created typically on the fly, but we do not want to use those. This particular one has square miles, so that's helpful. Another thing, there's a lots of rows for each county. The county now is the smallest geographic unit for which this other data has been collected. And how do I know that? Because I've looked through the text file and it tells me that. But you'll just need to know that. So because of that, we're going to have to do some dissolving here. Before we do that, I like to just visually clean up my attributes so I don't need to be looking at all of these. And what I'll do is right click and select turn field off for a few of these that I'm not concerned about. I'll use the state one in a moment. County one, we'll keep on. FIPS is good, and we could delete it. I'll just turn these off for now. And square miles, that'll come in handy as well. Also, be wary of when things are selected. I've got one row selected just because I've clicked over here. Get used to clicking this button here, clear selection. Sometimes some kind of funky stuff happens when we do processing and stuff are selected. So we can go ahead and close that. Now, I could join my data and then select an area, or I could select my area and then join my data. Both ways work. I'll go ahead and do the selecting the area first and then joining the data. And this is something you should be familiar with. Let's see. Selection, select by attribute. And from that layer here, I want to select state. Now notice it's only showing me the visible layers, so already it's a little bit easier to navigate. State equals, whoops, I only needed one equal in there, equals Texas. Now I know that it's TX, but I'm just being lazy, so I'll double click on it and hit apply. That just selects all the attributes that meet that criteria. Two ways we can add this to our map are both by right-clicking on the layer source. Now, if I click or if I hover over data, export data, I can specify if I want it to be Geodatabase, if I want it to be a shapefile, I can give it a specific name. It even prompts you if you want to re-import it. We'll do that later on. So a quicker way is just to go to selection and create layer from selected features. So just right away, bang, it just adds it right here, and we can turn off the other ones. Let's zoom in on that, see what it looks like. So that's one step we got to do. The other one still relates to the problem of our many rows and not necessarily many counties. Also notice by doing that, it's created and brought back a few of these attributes. We could hide those again, but I'll keep them on for now. What I am going to do is organize this by county, and here we can see a problem. I'm pretty sure there's not multiple Willacy counties, and if there were, the chances of them being all the exact same square miles is probably slim to none. So I can look at this, and there's two things you got to keep in mind. One, you just know that the county is the smallest geographic unit. That might not always be the case. Your data, the smallest geographic unit, might already be set up per row. So if that's the case, this next step will change slightly. But if your data is from the nationalatlas.gov, you'll probably want to do the same steps that I'll be doing. Let me unselect that. And that is a dissolve. So I've got my information here, geoprocessing. I will go to dissolve. I will input that county, and here I can see that it's automatically going to that default geodatabase that we specified. You don't have to give it any fields, any conditions at all. If you don't do that, it just uses adjacency. That's the only criteria. If it's adjacent, or if it overlaps, I think too, it dissolves those lines together. So you do not want to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it just to show you. You want to be patient here. It is thinking. It is designed to allow you to be doing other stuff while this processes in the background, but as you may have found out, ArcMAP can get a little picky if you're doing too many things at once. So there we go. I've created a new layer, and because I didn't give it any conditions, it just mashed everything together. And here I can see a few of those attributes that it created. So we do not want to do that. Let's remove that guy and repeat the process. Geoprocessing, dissolve, input is that one. And this time I'll give it a name. We'll call it a TX underscore county underscore. You don't have to do this. Sometimes it's a good idea just to help keep tabs on what is where. So there's two reasons we want to click on these. One is you're telling it you want to keep that attribute, so it doesn't just make it float away. It keeps it. The other one is it uses that attribute as a test to decide how many different rows to create. So if I click on state and actually I don't need state because it's already clicked on. If I click on county, every different county will result in a separate row. If there's two that are the same, they get merged, they get dissolved. So that's one condition. FIPS is another one, and square miles is another one. Now, in this data, I know that all of those are identical. If the county name is one thing, the FIPS will be one thing, the square miles will be another. If any one of those is different, it creates two separate rows. So just keep that in mind. Now, what I mentioned earlier, if the smallest geographic unit for which this data is represented is different than the counties, you would want to set a statistics field. I don't have one, but for example, maybe I had crime rates or crimes committed, and the crimes committed are collected based off of each floating island or each polygon. I would select that field, and down here I can give it a statistics type of sum. So let's see if hopefully I don't break it here, but you know what, I'm just going to pick area. Again, this is pretend that is something different. Under statistics type, I would say sum. You can give it mean, min, max, range, etc. But you do not want to do that. Just wanted to show you what that looked like. I hope I did not break it. Everything else should be good. Because I'll get a set that includes a county, a FIPS, and a square mile. All right, you do want to keep the create multi-part features selected. Let's click OK and cross your fingers. Hopefully I didn't break it. All right, there we go. It has added it. It has the name that I gave it. Let's close that. Let's take a look at the attribute data. All right, object ID, shape, and these length and area, those just get created whenever you're creating a new layer of information. Let's turn those off. Shape, we can turn off. I've got my county, which is good. My FIPS, yeah, we'll keep that on. Actually, we do want to keep that on. Square miles, really useful. These ones, again, you don't have to be doing this, just kind of a nice practice. So I've got a really good set of stuff to join other stuff to. And if I look down here, I now have 254 rows, which if you Google counties in Texas, you'll find out there are 254 counties. If I go back to this one, this is the one I originally created, there's 323 because that includes a lot of islands down by Beaumont and Galveston and Houston down here. So one county will have multiple little pieces. But we've just fixed that now by virtue of running a dissolve with some creative attribute selecting. So let's open that up. That looks pretty good. If you just quickly scan through this, you should not see any duplicates. Let's go ahead and close that. And while I'm here, I will click on identify, and I'll click on one of these islands, and notice it selects the whole county. So that's good too. All right, let's zoom back out. We are at a point where we can join the other data, and because we kept that FIPS, it'll be very painless. Now, if I screwed up and forgot to dissolve based off of the FIPS, I would not be able to do this. But let's right-click on your layer, go to Joins and Relates, and click on Join. So there's two ways to join. One is based off of a table. One is based off of spatial location. So if you didn't have that magic number that related them together, you can just go off of spatial location, which goes back to the projection problem. But this information does not have that, so I'll keep it table. And you just have to specify, okay, what field are we going to connect? In this layer, it's called FIPS. I will click on census, and in that database, I will connect it to one conveniently also called FIPS. Now I could go county to county, but whenever you're connecting strings, you run into the problem of spelling errors or abbreviations. If there's Saint in one, it might be spelled out, and the other it might be ST. So whenever you can join based off of values are identical. The join options, if I keep all records selected, it does just that, and I'll end up with 6,000 rows because it'll join data for counties that are not in Texas, but I want to keep only matching records. All right, with that set, let's hit OK. Now you may be prompted about indexing. Go ahead and hit yes. That just makes it easier to search for. Visually, nothing changed, but if I open my attribute table, a lot more attributes. All right, let's do that once more. Right click, joins and relates. Now, if you wanted to remove it, you can do that right here, but we don't want to remove it. We want to join another one. Once again, I will select FIPS. Now, you'll get a lot of overlap. You know, the FIPS shows up a couple of times in here. There may or may not be square mile data. You know, there'll probably be a point where, you know, the data doubles up. That's fine. It'll get messy before it gets cleaner. That's okay. And water use, I will connect it to FIPS and also say keep only matching records. Okay, notice how OK is grayed out. If you see that, just go ahead and click on this and click on FIPS again. Then it usually fixes it. So weird little bug. All right. Yes, once again to indexing. Let's take a look at the attribute table. All right, more information than you know what to do with. At this point, it's good to be able to, well, hopefully you'll have a rough idea about what your attribute data means. If not, for example, all of this water use stuff is really weird looking. You'd want to go back to that text file. So two things you probably want to do at this point is go to that text file, but you know what? Let's save the file too. Save early, save often. You should probably be saving more than what I've been doing. Okay, part of this assignment is I want you to show essentially the same data several different ways. And, you know, if you can't think of one, do it this way. Show the total used per county, show the total used per individual, and the total used per square mile. Those are pretty easy. But none of this process is totally linear. It's very cyclic. You might take a look at this data and get a whole new set of questions or ideas on how to represent it. For example, if I go to water use, and you know what, while I'm here, there was a question about citing this. How do you cite this? You know, an easy way is just say data compiled from the nationalatlas.gov website. If you want to get more detailed, you can pull some information out of here. I can say data from the U.S. Geological Survey based off of water resources and use in the United States. Lots of good information in here. But if I scroll down, it's a little tricky to look at, but you know, it's pretty easy to wrap your head around after a while. It lists my attribute label and the definitions. So quickly scanning through this, you know, how many different ways can water use be represented? Actually, there's quite a lot because, you know, this has estimated groundwater for public supply. It has estimated groundwater for irrigation. It has estimated surface water for irrigation. And basically any other combination you can think of. It has groundwater and surface water. It has freshwater and saline. Lots and lots of combinations. So depending on what you want to show, you want to be careful about what you select. For this example, I'd probably just want to use public supply. But just knowing that I can compare public supply to industrial supply, I can compare public supply to thermoelectric supply. Lots of ways to compare this. The other thing to keep in mind, this is not water used per person or water used per square feet. It's water withdrawn from the county. Keep that in mind because, you know, we're not saying this county withdraws this much water and uses this much water. There's probably a chance where a county withdraws more than it needs and another county uses more than it needs. But as you will eventually see when we do show this, the results can be kind of interesting and it essentially spawns additional questions. But back to our data. Let's see. If you look through this, you can start to get an idea of what it means too. So that means public supply, water, groundwater, fresh. This next one is public supply, water, surface water, fresh. Let's take a look at this one. This one looks good. Public supply, water, fresh, total. So that's just the ground and surface for public supply in millions of gallons per day. All right, that one's probably worth writing down. There's another really good one down here, for total water for everything. So this is all water for every single use. That one might be an interesting one to show. So maybe I'll keep that one on as well. All right, enough looking at the attributes. Let's go to our ArcMAP and let's take a look at that attribute table. I could come in here and very painfully right click and hide the ones I don't want. Here's a situation where you might just want to go to that layer properties, click on fields, and turn everything off, and then just turn on the ones you want. So I like to do it this way because the only ones I really need, the county name will be helpful. FIPS, I might come back and add something. Square miles, that's a good one. Let's see, here I can already see some doubles. The population is good. The population per square mile is good. And you know what? Even at this point, you might realize, wow, there's some data I didn't even think about. Maybe I want to compare the male to female population and see if that has a bearing on the other data I'm representing. Water use, who knows? Crime rate, who knows? Use your imagination. Has the median age, the percent urban, percent rural. But the ones I'm interested in that I've already decided are public supply, water fresh total, and what was the other one? Total water total. There we go. And you know what? I'm also going to turn on this square mile. So I've got that square mile and this square mile. One is attribute data for the shapefile. One is attribute data for this. Keep in mind this data may be collected from different sources and it may be defined differently. If you look through that attribute table, it'll probably explain more. You'll see why I'll do that in a moment. Hit apply, close this, and let's take a look. All right, so square mile. Yours may not look like this. You can drag these around too, so that's kind of nice sometimes. Here we go. So just notice you can rearrange those if you'd like. Now, why are these different? Why do I have 2 square miles? Again, it comes back to where the source. One might be intended to only be displayed at a certain scale. One might be, a little bit better resolution. For this assignment, they're going to be close enough either way. So I'll turn that one off. Here we've got a nice collection of data almost ready to be exported and styled in Google Earth Pro, but we'll add some more. So we've got population per square mile, public water in millions per day, and I know that because of the text file, and the total water in millions per day, millions of gallons. Now this is all water withdrawn from that particular county, not necessarily used. Good point to keep in mind. But I want to show this data in a little bit different way. For example, I want to know the public supply per individual average. So we can click this little flyout, click on add field. Now you got to give it kind of that funky name. So we'll say PSPP. So public supply per person. The data type, use double. Just trust me, I won't explain these data types too much, but I'll go ahead and say double. Now, because we are setting this on a Geodatabase item, this may look a little different. If you do the same process on a linked shapefile, you will have to set your variables for the double, and it means double precision. So, which means you'll set how many decimal places and how many characters on the left side of the decimal place. But because it's a Geodatabase, we don't need to do that. Hit OK. Now there's no values in here. Before I express those, I'll go and add another one. Let's say add field. And this one we want to say public supply per square mile. Once again, select double and OK. And maybe we want to say, do we want to do one for total versus public supply? It's a good idea. Make more attributes than you might need, just because you never know. So, you know what? I'll make a new one, and we'll call this PS_TO_diff. So there's my difference between the two. Okay, why am I keeping these really short? because if you make them too big, you'll get a little warning saying you can't do that. So just kind of keep them short and simple and something that you will understand. Double. Okay, so I've created my fields. Now we need to give them an expression. Pretty simple. You right click on the top. So which one am I on here? County, dissolve, okay. Public supply per person. All right, right click, click on field calculator, and we get this dialog. So, it seems intimidating because you're supposed to write this in either VB script or Python, two types of coding languages. You don't need to know the coding languages. If you know very basic mathematical expressions, that's all you really need. So for example, I want this one, public supply per person. I need to find this variable, double click, and I will say times 1 million, because that unit is millions of gallons per day. So this will give me the total number, and I don't need to add that little extra bit of millions per day. Now I'm going to put that in parentheses. That will force that to calculate before it moves out of the parentheses. Now I know there's a certain order. It's like multiply before divide, and divide before add, and add before subtract. But it's not a bad idea to force these things to happen in a certain order. So now I'll say divided by, and we will do population. All right, let's double check. That should give me my gallons. That's my population. All right, let's see what kind of water use is happening. It thinks for a moment and gives me all these kinds of values. So some are very low, some are non-existent. You know what? That might not be. That might actually be true, because there might just not be a water source. It might be a county built on a rock with no ponds or rivers. So, or it just might be so insignificant. Here's one that borrows a lot of water. Why are those guys so high? I don't know. Maybe Google Earth will tell us. But I don't like all of these decimal places. Nobody measures their water use down to the 100,000th of a unit. So let's right click on that, go to properties, and click on numeric. Here's where we can change that. Probably a tenth is good. So I'll say 1 decimal place. Hit apply and close. All right, that's looking okay. Couple outliers there. Wow, Coke County, what are you guys doing? Lots of water being used there. All right, let's figure out our public supply per square mile. And again, this is just water withdrawn from the county compared against the people in that county. Why do we want to do all this? There's lots of studies based off of the economy or the market value or market services or ecological services. So there's a reason we want to do this. But right, back to this field calculator. It keeps our same expression as before. This time I will get rid of that one. We will say the total water use divided by square mile. Hit OK. Once again, got our units. I'm also going to change that down to, for this unit, I probably don't need any decimal places. All right, so for every square mile, there's 60,000 waters withdrawn in Coke County. Last one is the difference between those two. Right click, field calculator. Let's see, I want to do, this one we can keep in millions of gallons. So I'll just start it over and we'll say total minus public supply. And okay. There we go. So, it keeps it to 2 decimal places because our source data is not that much. So, all right. At this point, we've got lots of good data. All we need to do is export this as a shapefile and remember what the names are. And then when we style it, it'll be fairly straightforward. But I'm going to take this a little step further because, I don't necessarily want to show 254 items at the same time. Maybe I want to show the top 10% for each one. The top 10% of total, the top 10% of average, and the top 10% per square mile. Here's how we need to do that. So I'll start by saying the county dissolve, okay, public supply per person. Well, let's start with a total. Let's right click, sort, descending, and again, that's in millions. And because there's 254, I will want to select 25. I'm holding down Shift as I do this, and I'm keeping an eye right here. 25 out of 254. Why did I do that? Because now I've got the top 10% of total water withdrawn for public supply freshwater counties. At this point, I will right click. This time I will go to data and export data. I will click this folder. I should be in that same folder. All right, I'm in my assignment 5. Now, I don't want to save this to a Geodatabase. I need to save it as a shapefile because Google Earth Pro cannot import from a Geodatabase. And let's call this top 10 total. Hit save. And okay. I do not want to add this. All right, let's go back to our attribute table. This time, I will deselect everything. Let's take a look at public supply per person. Once again, I will select the top 25. All right, I can see 25 down here. Close that, repeat the process. I am in the right folder. Call this top 10, that's 10%, I should clarify, per person. Now, I'm using a lot of shorthand here, but in the end, you don't want the consumer of this data to have to know what that means. We'll get that figured out a little bit later. All right, looks good, save, and okay. And I've got one more. Let's unselect per square mile. Oh, Dallas, using a lot of water. Which makes sense. All right. 25 are selected, right click, data, export data. Last step, top 10 per square mile. All right, believe it or not, that is all you need to do in ArcMAP. The next step will be taking this data into Google Earth Pro, and I will show you a few different ways that we can style it and make some hopefully easy to consume visuals that will give you the same idea as something like this with all of its attributes in a much more visual way. One of the features that really defines the Pro version of Google Earth is the ability to import and style shapefile data. The styling is heavily based off of the attributes and the values tied to those attributes, and it all works really well as long as the attribute data is there and you're really importing the extents of what you want to see. Now, a couple limitations are you don't really have a lot of control over editing the attribute values. I don't think there's any control. And you've got very little control over editing the extents of what you import. For example, if I were to import county data from the nationalatlas.gov, my choices are import everything, import a sample, in which case it would just grab a handful and randomly place them, or import a certain view. And honestly, the last two steps just don't work very well. So ideally, the shapefiles you import are already set to the extents of what you want to import. And as you probably saw with the last exercise with ArcMAP, that unless you've got very specific attributes and values, you can't use them. So with this example, I went and created 3 separate shapefiles. And on my desktop, they look like this. I can see the shapefiles, and there's the other files that are related to those. I probably should have made a separate folder for each one, but they're all in the same assignment 5 folder, so good enough, right? Back in Google Earth Pro. To import a shapefile, you simply go to File, Import, make sure that you set the file type to be shape, and go ahead and select it. Now when you first do this, you're prompted to apply style template. I'll go ahead and hit no. We'll do that a little bit later. But I will import the other two. So when it first imports them, it just automatically puts them underneath your temporary places. If you were to quit Google Earth, you might be prompted, but if you hit no to the prompt, it just deletes them. So you want to copy those to your My Places sooner than later. But before we do that, let's create essentially the organization of our KMZ. And it's just a matter of creating a couple nested folders. So the first thing I'll do, now you might already have data underneath your My Places. I keep mine kind of cleaned out, so I do not. But you want to right click, select add, and then folder. Now I'll probably rename these, but you know what, we'll just say assignment 5 for the top level. Right click on that, make another one. So you have to include some overlays, screen overlays. That's one component. And probably most important, you need to include some different views. So I'll say views and hit OK. Now I told you I wanted the same data essentially displayed 3 different ways, and that's what these relate to. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag those, drop those under views. There we go. I should also point out, I very intentionally exported 3 separate shapefiles. And the reason I did that is because the area displayed changes based off of my attributes. I have the top 10% of counties or top 25 counties based off of 3 different criteria. You do not need to do that. If you're showing the same geographic area 3 different ways, all you really need to do is make one shapefile and just make sure that that one shapefile has all of the necessary attribute data. And as you've seen with this example, let's take another look at that one's pretty boring. Let's just take a look at one of these guys. You can get a lot of attribute data. So ideally you have just the right amount of attribute data with each one of your shapefiles. So again, if it's the same geographic area, just make sure you've got the right attributes tied to it and just import it once. But you will need to make 3 copies of that one. So again, you can either do it the way I did or just import one, right click, select copy, and then right click on the folder that you want to place that in and select paste. And you would do that 3 times. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that because that is not how I'm doing mine. So we're ready to start styling. And there's really 2 ways to do this. One is to bring up the properties of the item in your places. And you can do that by right clicking and selecting properties. On the Mac that says get info, but it brings up the same dialog either way. So you can change the name, the description, the style, the color, etc. We'll come back and do some more of that later because a more powerful way to style is based off of the style editor, and we can access that either right after you import it and you're prompted to go through the wizard, or you can do it after the fact. So that's what we'll do. We have these imported. Go ahead and select the item that you want to style. Now it's a little goofy here, but what you want to do is go to Edit and Apply Style Template. And you can either create a new one or edit one of the ones you've already created. If you want to edit, you have to check that dialog, highlight it, and then click the edit here. It's a very buried feature, but to start, we will just create a new template. Now this one is based off of the top 10 total, so I'll keep that in mind for when I name it. The name, this is just for the display of the name in your places dialog. It's not a display in your 3D view over here, but it's still important nonetheless. Naming it by county makes a lot of sense, so I'll set that. Color, I'll actually use the properties to apply color a little bit later on. For height, this one is very important. We want to set height from a field. And this one, now if you remember what these meant here, that's public supply water fresh total. That's the one I wanted to use. And once that is selected, we've got 2 options, continuous and split into buckets. If by chance yours only has split into buckets, that means that this data was saved as a string type. It's a common problem, but if it's a string, all Google Earth knows it's a word, and you can't do a continuous mapping of words. You can only continuously map numeric values. Let's move that up a little bit. So ours are saved in the right value. I will hit continuous. And before we hit OK, let me just talk about how we're going to be looking at this. This is really just a visual display, and the only decisions you need to make from looking at this visual display is something more than its neighbors. Now, so I'm not concerned that there's essentially a three-dimensional scale with all of this. I just want it to be effective in how it's viewed. So that being said, we might need to play around with this a little bit. Scaling factor and our continuous mapping options are kind of related, but kind of not. So it's a little kind of weird here, but this is essentially a scale applied to our data that exists. Our minimum is 32, and that's millions of gallons per day. Maximum is 547 millions of gallons per day. If we wanted that to be a one-to-one representation, I would just change these values to be the same. So I'll just copy that and paste that. Now, if I were to hit OK, 540 meters would barely register this view. We're going to be looking at this thing from pretty high up. So I would probably change that by a couple decimal points. So we'll say 3268 by 54764 meters. Let's just see how it looks. It's a little bit of trial and error. Let's hit OK. And we have to save this. You know what? The name doesn't really matter. The consumer of this information won't see this, so we'll just try this. Let's call it try 1. And let's turn that on and see how it looks. Not so bad. It doesn't really show as well as I would like, so I'm going to go back and edit that. Here's where that editing gets a little kind of weird, but good stuff to know. Highlight that item. Go back to edit, apply style template, even though we're going to edit. We'll use existing, select the one you just created, and check this box here, edit selected template. And then we just need to go back. Let's add another decimal place to that. Or I could drag this slider. 2 ways to do it. Let's see if this one works. This one, we'll find out. Hit OK. Once again, save it, place it. Okay, that's not so bad. I can see out of the top 10%, or the 25 most water consuming or water withdrawing counties in Texas, I can start to very quickly determine which ones obviously withdraw more than others. And if I click on these, you get a little pop-up with a lot of messy information. It includes the name of the attribute and that attribute value. We'll be editing that in just a moment, but we're on the right track. Kind of neat stuff, right? So, all right, let's style this some more. So now I will go back to the properties. Right-click on the item, go to properties, and at this point, it probably makes sense to give it a name that makes sense. So let's say county water withdrawal, and I'll say total. All right. Now this is actually important because the consumer of this, the people who are viewing this, this is what they will see. Now I could come back and edit the description. I won't worry about that quite now. But the style and color, because there's a lot of items that are living underneath that folder. It looks like a little globe, but it's actually a folder, and you can see that little expansion arrow on the side. We want to share that style. Now, in my example, these can all be the same color because I'm comparing one thing, water use. If you were doing something that required categories, that's a slightly different process. You would either export those separately as different shapefiles and import them, very creatively, or when we style these, we can create certain buckets. So if that's the situation you're running into, best thing is probably just to let me know and I can help walk you through it. But for styling this, I don't want to show the lines, so I will change the opacity to 0. I do not want random coloring, so I will check that. And for color, let's give it this blue. and maybe 50%. Let's see how that looks. Now, I don't think the Mac automatically updates like this, so it's kind of neat that the PC does, but either way, when you hit OK, you should see that change. You know what? I don't really like that blue. Let's try that blue. Oh, that's not what I wanted. All right, that looks okay. You know what? Maybe I'll turn the line weight up to 10. You know what? I don't like that. I'm going to say 0. So you get the idea. You can kind of play around with it a little bit here. And this part, this is really cool. When you clicked on those shapes and you saw that data, it's rendered based off of this. And this is really basic HTML formatting. You don't need to be an HTML programming genius to figure this out, but just essentially know there's an opening tag and a closing tag. So more times than not, when you see something like TR right here, you will see a /TR. Now those are just tags that define it as a very specific element in Google or in HTML, so when it's rendered. All you really need to pay attention to here are a couple of small things. One is this variable. See that $, something, something, something there. That's a variable that will render a different value based off of what is clicked. So here we can get a real dynamic feature to how all of this is rendered when you click on those different shapes. So what I will do is style this a little bit more. I want to say something like, let's copy that one because I know that one equals county name. So we'll say county uses, or let's change this up here. Let's change that first value to be the water withdrawn, which is this one right here. So here's where you don't want too many variables. If there was 100 attributes in here, that would be a problem. But we may not actually use everything. We've kind of pared it down. But remember, we included this total water use. And I've also got the public supply water use. It's here. You don't have to use it. But if you want to, it's kind of nice that it's there. But I'm going to copy that variable for the millions of gallons measured in public supply. I'll paste that here. And let's say millions of withdrawn from. Now I will copy and paste this county name. So that many millions of gallons of water are withdrawn from that county every day for public supply. And now I can get rid of all of this if I don't want to use it anymore. And you can add, if you just want to Google basic HTML formatting, you can learn some really useful things like B equals bold. So if I put a couple of brackets and a B and then I put a /B over here, that will be bold. To make this a little bit easier to read, I'll go ahead and put bold around the amount and the county. Another useful one is it's called BR. It's either bring right or break, I forget, but BR /. Now this one does not need an opening and a closing. It just needs that one thing. So that essentially says make a new line. So I like to make a couple copies. Now I'll probably add one more, and this time I will say data source : let's add those bring rights, and we'll say nationalatlas.gov. Now here's another little HTML thing. I promise this should be it here. We can put in what's called a hyperlink. A space href equals a couple quotation marks, and then I like to fill this rest of this out first. So there's my first part, A space href equals, and then at the end of that I want a /A, and you would type the website address here, so which is http:// That's where you need to type in the whole thing. So data source, there we go. All right, let's hit OK. Let's see how this works. Yeah, that's not so bad, right? very quick pop-up visual display. Now, if you really want to see how crazy these can get, go ahead and do a search for Disney World and turn on your 3D buildings. Now, I won't go ahead and do it, but you can embed Flash and all kinds of other neat things in here. If you created a photosynth, you can embed that. Basically, whenever you see an embed link, so whether you've got a YouTube account or a Picasa account or a Flickr account, you have the option to share those, and it'll give you a chunk of code that's called an embed. And you can just grab that, paste it in here, and that stuff will show up. So lots of ways to very quickly style this data. Just very useful and very helpful and interactive. So a part of this assignment is how do we show the minimal amount of stuff, the minimal amount of words, and still communicate the most amount of information. So we're really balancing a few things here. One is visuals, the other is pop-ups, and the other is just being very thoughtful of how this is named. And the whole package is really a nice, a nice presentation that kind of hits on all cylinders. So, you know what? Before we get too far, I'm going to go ahead and edit that once more because I had one too many bring rights in there, and I'm going to go ahead and add a what's called a font tag. So I'll do font, and then over here /font, and over here I'm going to say color equals, and inside of double quotes put in gray, and yeah, let's see how that looks. Hit OK. It's a little bit nicer. The hyperlink works. If I click on it, it opens up the Atlas browser. So good stuff. Now, as I mentioned before, if you wanted to cite that in a little bit more detail, I would go ahead, access that data, the metadata, and just pull it out of here. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go and type all of this, but you can really cite that with a lot of precision. So there's no question of where it came from. Anyway, we've got one done. Let's try this one. Our top 10%, which is the water used per square mile of the county. Okay, just repeating the process. It's highlighted, edit, apply style template. We'll create a new one. Same as before, we will give it a county as the name of the field. Under height, set height from field. This one is the PS public supply per square mile. Now that's one we created. So again, just repeating the process here. Our values are much different. So here's where you got to be a little creative in picking values that don't differentiate a lot from this in terms of the visual display. We don't want the next one to be, popping off into this, to the moon. So let's see here. If we stay that to the same, I think the visual should be in terms of extent pretty similar. Let's do that. Let's do that. Let's hit OK. Save that as try 2. And turn it on. Yeah, it's not so bad. So there's one view, there's the other. Okay, now we need to go in and edit the properties over here. So let's call this one County Water. Let's see, gallons per person. Be very careful about how you word this because I don't want to say used per person. It's really a relationship between how much water is withdrawn compared to the population of the site. So per person, maybe we say per population. Yeah, sounds good. So, oops, Google Earth is having a little hiccup here. Style and color. Once again, I will share the style. I'm just repeating the same things I did before. Set the opacity to 0. The color I will set to blue. I think I used that one. And 50%. I also deselect random. I'll come back and edit the balloon because I forget exactly how I worded that. See, now notice visually they look the same when we jump from one to the other. There's just a visual representation so you can see which counties average more per person compared to the total use in that county. It's a little bit of a change, not a whole lot. Oh, and this is also the top 25 counties, top 25 counties. Most of them are the same. But here's why I wanted to exit out of that. I'm going to edit that first one and just copy this. So cancel, right click, properties, style and color, and paste. So now these are the same values as before. I just want the formatting to be mostly similar. So let's say this one would be our top 10. See, that's not that one we want. Per person, this variable right here, making sure you get from the $ to the bracket. Copy that, and I'll paste it over this one. Now it's no longer millions, because remember when we calculated that attribute value in ArcMAP, in the expression we included the millions in there. So now we're just talking about gallons. So we'll say that many gallons of water are withdrawn from that county every day for public supply. And we need to add one more condition in here. Every day for per person. Maybe it'd make more sense to say on average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn every day for public supply per person. All right, that sounds pretty good. Now the rest of this I can get rid of. Let's hit OK and see how that looks. On average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from, whoops, small problem with the variable there. Let's go ahead and try to fix that. Oh, you know what? I probably should not have, there's our problem. It has the name of the actual shapefile included in the variable, so I just got to change that to top 10 PSM. All right, let's see if that does it for us. There we go. That many millions of gallons. Oops, wrong one. Let me turn off that one. On average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from Coke County every day for public supply per person. That's a lot of gallons. Something is wrong here because that number is obviously much larger than that number. Yet that graphic is much higher. That means we need to go back to the style template. Edit height field from public supply per square mile. Oh, whoops! I'm getting the thing I'm showing mixed up between the two here. That's why. So let's go back, edit the properties. On average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from that county every day per square mile. And because I deleted those variables, I'm going to borrow this one to figure out what that was. It was that one, public supply per square mile. So I'll just copy over that variable. Get rid of that one extra slash. All right, so this should be right. On average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from this county. I got those mixed up once again. Let's say cancel. Okay, third time's charm. That's where I want it to go. On average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from that county every day per square mile. That's the magic. So let's see if it works. Yep. Fourth time's the charm. I forgot I had to remove that one extra slash. See, it's just that easy. On average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from Cook County every day. So if I click on this one, the number should be much higher. Much higher. Talking hundreds of thousands. All right, let's see if the last one goes a little bit smoother. Turn that off. I think Google Earth got a little hung up on me here because the graphics are not changing. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and exit and open that back up. Because I moved these things out, it should still work. Good troubleshooting stuff to know in case you run into the same. So click on it. Still works. Let's go ahead and do the last one. Highlight, edit, apply a style template, create new. The name will be based off the county. The height is from a field. This one is based off of the water per public supply per person. The continuous option should be set. I will copy and paste these values over here just so I can start with a 1-to-1 ratio. Now this one, let's try 2 decimal places. I'll keep that to meters and hit OK. Okay, so this one's, it's getting a little bit out there, but I think we can make it just a hair bit smaller. I'll go ahead and edit that. Use existing, select the one we just created, which, strangely enough, I can't remember what was named. Maybe it was that one. All right, it looks like that was the correct one. Nope, it was not. But you know what, we'll just use this one. And we'll say, based off of that same value, so once again, I'll do 2 value places. So public supply per person. And I'll change my scale down just a hair. Now this is a totally different, it's a different style sheet, but there was enough common information where I can still use it. It's a little bit better, not a whole lot, but still some very valuable information. Let's edit the properties of that. And we'll call this average style and color. We want to do share. I don't want my lines to show. And I want my color to be that blue with a 50% opacity. Let's see if that looks okay. And I forgot to uncheck random. Also, on that other one, I forgot to change that. Just to make these a little bit more consistent. So almost done. I've got my 3 views. I've got them mostly styled. I've got to edit that last one just a hair more. I'll turn off the random. And I want to edit this information again. So let's go ahead and borrow the code from the other one. Just did a quick copy of that. Properties. And again, primarily doing this to keep the formatting consistent. So on average, I want my variable that shows the gallons per person, which is right here. I'll copy that. Paste it over that. I got an extra bracket. So on average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from that county. Don't forget to change the name to match the style sheet. Whoops, I accidentally hit escape. That's no good. Gotta go back to here, copy that. Paste it in. So just repeating some steps because I accidentally hit escape. So on average, that many gallons of water are withdrawn from that county every day for public supply per person. Get rid of that. It all looks good. Hit OK. So I've got my 3 separate views that show 3 pretty different pieces of information. I've got my bubbles set up so even more valuable information can be viewed by clicking on each shape. The last 2 things I need to do are create some screen overlays which give us a little bit more information in terms of legend and instruction. And another useful little trick is we can change our views over here to be exclusive of one another. So if you click on one, the other one is automatically turned off. And we also might want to rename these. As we're building this, think of our KMZ. This is how someone will be seeing it. So assignment 5, that doesn't really mean anything. I'll change the properties of that and say Texas County Water Statistics. Hit OK. Now overlays, let's move that below everything else, but not too far because I don't want it to be outside of that folder. Right now it's underneath my... It's kind of a tricky game here, getting this in to get to the right spot. There, that's an easier way. I want my views folder be on top of overlays. Now on the views folder, what should we call that? Let's call it three different perspectives. But this one is really important. The only reason I wanted to open this up is you have the option to show contents as options or radio buttons. If I click on that, then hit OK, look what happens over here. It creates just a radio button that you click on one and the others automatically get turned off. So this makes for a very interactive experience. Very straightforward. I can click on it. The title hopefully tells you something about what's going on. And we'll offer some additional instruction with our screen overlays in the next steps. Now I should probably include somewhere over here that this is the top 25 counties. That would probably be in the title of this or this one here. Let's change that one. All right, so at this point, we're even closer to being done. The last series of instructions, the last steps will be creating the screen overlays that will really allow us to package up a very effective, hopefully very effective and informational KMZ package. At this point, we are nearly done. The last piece, or one of the last pieces to this puzzle, is adding the image overlays, which really add to the overall presentation in terms of giving us either instruction, citations, or a legend to help understand what's going on in our visual display. Now, a little review of how we've worked with images. You've got this option right up here, the Add Image Overlay. And if you click on that, you can navigate to an image and import it. It just drapes it over the earth, and you can kind of position it. And in fact, let's go ahead and try that. I will select, this graphic here. And there it is. I can rotate it. It's very large. I can move it this way, and so on. So, it's kind of a creative way if you want to include some additional graphics to help explain what's going on, but not quite what we'll be doing. So let's just hit cancel. So another way we've worked with is using the Geographic Imager plugin for Photoshop and creating a georeference TIFF. Now, again, that's another feature that you can only use with the Pro version of Google Earth, but you can import correctly georeferenced images and they just pop into place. But there's still an overlay on the Earth, an Earth overlay essentially. What we'll be working with is a screen overlay, very much like the little Google Earth watermark in the corner, or the navigation tools over here. Notice that as you navigate, they don't change their position. They just kind of hang out and they're overlaid on your screen. Another good way to see some examples of this is to take a look at the Earth gallery. Now, if you click on that, you should be taken to a link with a lot of different Google Earth KMLs and KMZs that you can download and load up. Now, I'll go ahead and open one that I downloaded. Now, this one's cool for a couple of reasons. It's a network link, meaning this data lives on a server and is updated every day. Now, you can create network links, or you can create just standalone KMZs, and the latter is what you'll be doing. But this is kind of neat. We've got a little legend, and as we zoom around our KMZ, we can click on the different place marks and get some informative pop-ups with some links. We can turn a few items on and off from our places. For example, if I just want to see, whatever, the continental transform fault, there it is. You can probably edit those as well. Nope, you can't. So let's go ahead and zoom back into that. But the point is, it's got a neat little overlay down here, USGS, and an informative legend. So let's go ahead and delete that and try to zoom back to our information. So another really good example of different overlays is available directly from Google. Now, if you go to the class Blackboard, go to the class assignments and exercises, and scroll down to the entry for the 30th, Wednesday's class. If you download the zipped package, there is a KML sample file inside of that. So you can access it from that. Or if you scroll down these notes, there's a section here that includes some links, and it has the Google code links. I believe it's also available from those links. But once you download it, it looks like this. It's a KML samples.kml file. And in Google Earth, I'll go ahead and open that up. So it's not only image overlay samples, it's samples for everything you can essentially program with KML. And let's make that layers section a little bit smaller. So there's place mark examples, there's styles and markup. If you double click on those, I think it zooms in so you can see in a little bit greater detail. But towards the bottom here, let's take a look at the screen overlays. So let's click on that. Let's turn off the other ones. And let's expand that folder by clicking this little arrow. So it's kind of messy, but it just shows you the different options for using screen overlays. Bottom left, bottom right, top, dynamic, etc. And with that expanded, you can turn them on and off individually. So that first one is just a little crosshairs right in the middle. The second one is upper left. Now I've seen some really creative uses of this. People have created flight simulators, so they wanted to create kind of a cockpit, so they'll use different graphics to give that impression. You've seen it used as a legend. You can use it for watermarking, all kinds of uses. But to edit these, it's a little simple. So I don't want you to be intimidated. We gotta jump into some more code. But all you need to do is right click on one of these, and I will use the bottom left. I'll use this to create 3 different overlays. But right click and select copy. And you'll want to go to a text editor. I was already playing around with this, so I'll go ahead and delete that. Now, can't stress this enough. You have to use something like Notepad on Windows or TextEdit on a Mac. Do not use Microsoft Word, because Microsoft Word includes all kinds of these invisible characters, which will really muck up what you're trying to do. So just a very basic text editor, and paste. So when I copy from Google Earth by right clicking and select copy and right clicking and pasting, it just pastes the code. So this is what's called an XML or a KML markup language. The ML stands for markup language. Just like the HTML, it's got tags, opening tags and closing tags. The only things you really need to worry about here are the name. So if I change that name, I'll just call this one graphic. This will not generally be seen. The other one is the reference, the href. So this is pointing to the image. You can either point to an image that lives on a website, or you can point to one that lives locally. We'll come back to that in a moment. The other 2 that are really important are these 2 guys here. There's the overlay XY and the screen XY. And this makes, it seems a little confusing at first, but it's really quite clear. And I made this little graphic here. All that means is your overlay is your image. So what part of your image do you want to connect or overlay with what part of your screen? And the numbers are just like this. The lower left corner is 0, 0. That's your X and that's your Y. Your lower right is 1, 0. So in the X direction, you move 1 or 100%. In the Y, we're moving 0. Top left, 0, 1. Top right, 1, 1. Center, 0.5, 0.5. Pretty easy to understand, you know, and if you don't quite get it, just use trial and error. In this example, our overlay is set to 0 and -1. All right, there's a curveball already, but that's okay. You can use negative dimensions. That just means it's moving the insertion point -1 unit away from what would normally be the insertion point. What does that mean? Well, that's why this is actually kind of bumped up a little bit. There's a little space down here that equals 1 height of our image. If that was set to 0, if that was 0, 0, this corner would be right in the corner and not bumped up like that. So that's why that looks like that. And to continue here, I'm going to go ahead and turn off those samples so we can see, oops, we can see how this works, and jump back to here. So the parts we need to fill in, I'll make that one 0, are the image. Okay, before you can do that, you need to create the image. How do you create an image, and how do you create it with transparency? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I hope you guys all know Photoshop, but to create a transparent image, you just need to have the transparency built into the file. For example, in this little number example, if I drag my background to the trash, I now have a transparent image, and I would just need to save this as a PNG, for example. You can have transparencies in some file types, but not in others. JPEGs cannot. GIFs you can, PNGs you can, Photoshop files you can. I recommend just use a PNG. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. And I'll look at a couple graphics I've already created. I've got just a couple that are more eye candy. This is the one I want to position in the lower right. This is the one I want to position in the lower left. And the reason is to give me somewhat of a seamless connection. So I'll always have this water graphic at the bottom of my screen. This one, now this is a Photoshop file that contains some text files and some transparencies. And what I've done is just edited the text to be appropriate for whatever item I happen to have in my view. So what I've done with these is save them, and I've just put them on my desktop. These do not need to be in the same folder that we've been saving all of our geodata, because this will eventually get embedded into the KMZ. So more on that later. But I have saved these to the desktop. Another very important point, you can use KML, you can use KML to adjust the size. So you don't need to size it necessarily, but to keep us out of the coding land as much as possible, I strongly recommend that you have it saved to the correct size. We're working with stuff that will be displayed on your screen. So if it says 100% in Photoshop, that is how big it will be displayed in Google Earth. So I recommend you just make these the correct size from the get-go for screen display. This will not be printed. So I'll move that out of the way, and I'm going to hop onto my desktop. Here is that folder where I've been placing these images, and I've named them very simply, very intentionally. You'll see why here in a moment. LL is lower left, lower right, per individual, per square mile, and total. So that's the name of my files. Okay, how do we get our reference? How do we reference these images here? Well, you need to know the path, what's called the path of where these live. To find that, right-click on the actual file, not on the folder. Find the file, right-click, and on the Mac, you'll want to do Get Info. On Windows, you'll want to go to Properties. That will bring up this dialog, and here it says Location. I think on the Mac it may say Path, but you should be able to recognize it. You want to copy that, but don't forget, that just gives you the location. It does not include the file name. So I will copy that. I'm just using the key shortcut, and I will paste that in between the href brackets. But we need to include the last step, which is the file name. So I will go slash, just make sure it's the same slash. On the Mac, it goes the other way. It's that slash, but we want it to be matching. And I will do ll.png. All right, so that's my image. Now I want to match this to the 0, 0 location, which is the lower left on my image, and to the screen. So this is actually all looking pretty good. All I need to do is select that text, right-click, copy, go back to Google Earth, and remember we created this folder called Overlays just when we were creating the structure of our KMZ. I will right-click and select Paste. There we go. Pretty neat. If I make this smaller, if I move this around, that always stays in that location regardless of the size, how small or how large this gets. And it actually doesn't look too bad. It just kind of fades off because of that transparency. All right, let's jump back. And I will edit this to be lower right because that's the name I gave the other one. Just all I need to do is change that. And I need to change this now to 1 and 0 and 1 and 0. Select, copy, go back to here, right click on that folder and hit paste. So now I've got this seamless from one end to the other, kind of little eye candy water graphic, and it's kind of cool. If you drag it, it kind of gives you the little wavy stuff. A little cheesy, but kind of a neat example. So that will be on regardless of our other layers. That's why I created that overlay to be outside of these other items. But with our legends, we want those to change, just as when what we graphically see changes. When we click on these different guys, we want this legend to change on this next one. So back to our code. And this time I'm going to change the name to legend. And I will do t.png because I know that one is my total. So where do we want to position this? Well, I want it to be halfway across. So I'll change both of those. One is where's the point on my image that I'm going to match from, and where's the point on my screen that I'm going to match to. So halfway across on both, and all the way up on both, which is why I'm making the y equals 1. Copy that. I just use my shortcut. This time I will paste it, but I'll right click on this item up here. Right click, paste, and bang, it puts it right there. Now, upon looking at this, that might not be the best location. I think I want to move that over, so all I need to do is come back here and change those to zeros. Copy. Let's get rid of that first. Right click, delete, and right click, paste. Whoops, that was not right. I believe I wanted that to be 0 in the X direction and 1 in the Y. Copy. Wrong application. Once again, I'm going to delete that one that I did not mean to do. Right click and paste. That just reminded me of something very important. Be very, very careful when you right click and delete stuff, because there is no undo in Google Earth. If I were to right click and delete all of this represented data here, the stuff I imported, I'd have to go through that whole import process again. So be very careful what you delete. All right, that one looks good. Let's get the last two and get this puppy done with. PI was my per individual graphic. Copy. And I need to make this bigger. Per person. Right click and paste. One more. PSM. Copy. Back to here. Right click and paste. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize those. Let's clear out. Let's delete the contents of my temporary places. Test it out. It's looking pretty good. Let's close that overlay. You know, and one thing, there's no reason that the overlay should really be opened up by the consumer of this. So what I'll do with that one, I'll right click, go to properties, and I can check this box here, allow this folder to be expanded. It doesn't get rid of it, it just doesn't let people open it up. So we can turn it on and off, but you know, as much as we can minimize what people have to do, the better. The one of the last things would probably make sense to assign a snapshot. Now the snapshot is what this resorts to when the item is double clicked on. So for example, if I zoom out here and if I double click on this item here, it zooms me back. We could do it for each item. So let's say our county water withdrawal, if I double click, it does that. I'm going to go ahead and move this into a position that makes sense. Maybe zoom in. That looks good. Once it gets to where you want it, right click and select snapshot view. So now that is saved with that view. I'll do the same with that one. You know, and maybe just to add a little bit of interest, we'll have these changed for each one. Snapshot view. Last one. Right click. Snapshot view. Okay, and my Google Earth kind of locked up on me again here. Let's go ahead and quit it and reopen it and see if everything still works. I really hope it does, because I don't want to redo. And it looks like it does. That last one's maybe not the best view, so right click, snapshot view. So now when I click on my little bars over here, my graphic changes, my legend changes. My legend includes additional instruction. It describes very minimally, but it describes what we're looking at. And it says, you know, click each shape for additional information. Hey, neat, right? And that's all styled from a previous step. if you know any HTML, you can really make that look cool. It has select additional options in your Google Earth sidebar, which is over here. Very easily I can jump through those, so it makes a lot of sense if someone were to just come across this and be interacting with it by themselves. It also is a very valuable tool if you're just using it in a presentation. And you can kind of see it. I got to change my view here, but I've also included a line of citation on that overlay. So this whole process has really resulted in an interactive, very data-rich KMZ. And the point is, how do we convey as much information as possible with the most effective visual tools? And we're really using a method that's called it's like tiered deployment, or it's very carefully presenting the data based off of how people interact. So we're not just dumping everything at once. It's a fairly discoverable tool in terms of encourages people to click around. And all in all, it's a really valuable thing. The very last step, and this is very important because with this KMZ, it's pointing to a local file. Now, you can't expect everyone to access the local files on your computer. You've got two options. You can either upload those to a web server and paste that web server link. Now, the nice thing about that is anytime you change that web server link, the KMZ changes. So this graphic may change from one to another. But we will embed this in the file. And that's really easy to do. All you do is right-click on that top-level KMZ. Now this gets way back to why we started and why we structured this like we do. And save place as. So I can see it gives me the name. It ends in KMZ. Let's save this to the desktop. Now, a little tangent item here. A KMZ is just a compressed or a zipped KML. So a little trick I found out, and I'll use this one, is if you change the extension from KMZ to .zip, and it'll warn you, it's like, do you sure you want to do that? It becomes a zipped package that you can open up and look inside. So kind of a neat little trick in case you find a KMZ online. You want to know what's inside of it. But to test this out, I'm going to go ahead and drag this to my Mac side, which effectively is a different computer. And I will see if I can't open this up in Google Earth. I would recommend you guys do this. Copy it to a jump drive. Make sure you can open your file from another computer. And I'm going to navigate to that file. I did not save a view with my top level, so I probably should have snapshotted that top level view. I did snapshot the lower levels, but be sure and snapshot a top level view so when it first opens up. But the graphic works, the radio buttons work, it's all good. So that is the process, or one example of many that you can use to complete this assignment. Good luck. I look forward to seeing what you create.